feels like over the past few years, our relationship with work has changed. The pandemic was a global event that accelerated our adoption of different working styles, and we've seen the rise of gig work, remote work, hybrid work models, and rapid changes in technology with AI. And while those things have had major benefits, there's been a downside. It turns out we're lonelier than ever. 4 years into a pandemic, the Zoom happy hours aren't really cutting it anymore. Some stats I want to get into in today's episode that I think you'll find interesting. More than 40% of fully remote workers say they go days without leaving the house. And those who work in office spend 1/4 of their time in virtual meetings, while face-to-face meetings account for only 8% of their time. And this one might shock all of you. Americans have spent 3 times the time spent in meetings since 2020, leaving less time for casual stuff and more time for meetings where we never make the decision and then we have to have another meeting. And the number of US adults who call themselves lonely has climbed to 58% from 46% in 2018. So today, I want to dig into how to build connection at work in a not so cringy way. You just heard those stats and you probably feel a little lonely as well. And so I want to dig into what strategies can actually work to help bring connection. And I brought you a guest who helped her company redefine and reinvigorate their culture after a pivot from working in person to becoming fully remote. Joining me today is Austen Tully, the SVP and Director of Integration and Culture at Guided by Good, the parent company to advertising agencies 22 Squared and Trade School. A veteran of the advertising industry, Austen has spent nearly 2 decades leading the development of breakthrough campaigns for some of the world's largest and most beloved brands. But in 2022, following COVID, a permanent shift to remote work and a company restructure and the appointment of new executive leaders, Austen's most meaningful and challenging career evolution came about, reinvigorating her own company's brand by putting culture back at the forefront. By harnessing the power of trusted relationships, taking a we, not me approach to everything, and persuading leaders to invest in connection-building programs to bring humans, not just workers, together, Austen has created new unity and stickiness in what is often one of the most transient industries. Austen, welcome.
Hebba, thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm so pumped to have you. Your background is so fascinating, and I think it's so cool that you are now in this culture role after spending so much time at the company and really knowing the culture.
I know. Well, the background is you're coming in live in my clawfest is what I call it. It's my closet and my office combined. I could give you a tour, but it would be a short one. You know what? This is a good segue. You know, when you come into people's homes, when you work remotely, every tough thing that happens at work, every great thing that happens at work also happens in your house, in your space. And so it's a very intimate thing to work remotely and to work from home and have all of the, demands and pressures and joys and triumphs, of work happen also in your home.
Isn't it? I stare at my desk. So this is a big thing. I'm in my bedroom. Not a lot of people know that. I live in central DC, so small condo. And I stare at my desk sometimes from my bed. And I literally think oh, I didn't answer that email, or, oh, I should have done that task. Yes. So I'm working on dividing my spaces, but I love that you mentioned that, because that is the stat about people not leaving their home during remote work. Ugh, I can't wait to get to that today with you. But before we get there, I'm asking every guest this season, what do you believe is the key to maintaining strong relationships at work?
Oh, not to get immediately cliche 30 seconds into this, but the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott was so transformative, because I really think the idea of care personally, challenge directly is so spot on. You can care a lot and struggle to articulate. You can be really direct and not get your message through because it's so abrasive. But if you're able to demonstrate to the people around you that you care personally, and you're able to be very direct in praise, in criticism, in just feedback and honesty, that is the way to build a relationship. And it's true with your friends. I'm the friend that if you have lettuce in your teeth, I'm going to tell you. And I would hope that you tell me. It's not a good friend to let somebody walk around with, something that they could fix. And so I think it's really important that that you take that approach. Now, I will also say, remember that at work in particular, today's team is not going to be tomorrow's team. So the way that you treat people and the relationships that you build need to go far and wide, and you need to be thinking a year, 3 years, 5 years down the road, because somebody who may report to you today might be somebody you report to in 3 years. And I see that happen all the time at my company. So really thinking about relationships as a true, honest exchange of love, empathy, and truth, but in a way that is, especially at work, a little bit strategic and not being overly hierarchical and not assuming that anyone, owes you respect because, they don't. You have to, demonstrate to earn it. So that's my long-winded answer.
I love that. That wasn't long-winded at all. I also love radical candor. It's so funny you bring up the lettuce and teeth thing, because we did a manager training where my CEO asked everybody, like, would you tell somebody they had lettuce in their teeth? And a lot of people were like, no. And he was
God.
we need to tell. Like, he was like, here's the analogy. And he brought it right back to that. I thought that was fascinating because I was like, I will tell everybody. I'm
Totally.
like the kind of friend that's like, hey, that outfit is not really doing you justice. Or like pick a different color. Like, yeah, it's just clear as kind. So like, I'm with you on that one. I think like, I don't know. I think at some point, Austen, we all got like weirdly robotic at work, where we thought like everything had to be super polished and like super not intense, and like we couldn't be direct. And I feel like it's just done us so much harm overall, because it's like we can't build strong relationships if we're not being honest with each other.
I agree. And I also think for women in particular, this is such a great construct, because it takes the magic of what women, I think, just carry inherently, which is strong emotional intelligence, the ability to read other people. Not to say that men don't, but I think women have a special magic about how they do that, and amplifies it with the tools to be able to also come at you and say, here's something you need to hear. And I'm telling you this because I care about you. And if I didn't care about you, I wouldn't give you the time, but you matter to me. And so I want to demonstrate my care by telling you something you need to hear. And that the best relationships in my life at work and, at home. I mean, my goodness, my 4-year-old daughter is brilliant at radical candor. Sometimes she's more on the candor side.
Kids.
But no, I really think for kids for sure. But women, I think, women leaders, they display this. And I think it's, such a huge skill. So
I love it. I love that call out. Okay, well, today that was a great answer to the key to strong relationships, honesty and trust. But today I want to talk about connection. Can you believe those stats I read? More than 40%. Well, yeah, actually, both of us, we can believe it. The one that like really stuck with me, more than 40% of fully remote workers say they go days without leaving the house.
Yeah.
And I was like, The other week, I'm not kidding. My husband was like, hey, when's the last time you left the house? And I was like, I like went to my workout class like 3 days ago. And he was like, 3 days ago?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's right.
Are you going to leave the house anytime soon? I was like, I get so caught up in work, and I literally joke that I go desk, couch, bed. I'm just doing like the hopping from different areas till I go to sleep, and then wake up and do it again. But I thought that was like really fascinating, because we're talking a lot about this like loneliness thing. And if you're at home and you're going days without leaving the house, like no wonder our loneliness has just gone way up.
I agree. I think there's so many layers to this too. If you live alone, if you don't have a spouse or a roommate or a pet or, a child or whatever, the level of loneliness is, immediately quadrupled. If you have somebody who lives in your space with you, it's definitely, better. But I do think that I too am in a place where even with a husband and, kids and a dog, I find myself, going sometimes 2 days, depending on the drop-off schedule, whatever, in my house. And it can feel very isolating. So I think, and this is another thing that we talked about, especially early pandemic, there were so many people who were in a life stage to say, oh my gosh, what a relief and a gift that I can work from my beautiful 4-bedroom home with a yard and all these things. But then you had other folks who were, potentially starting their careers or had just moved to a new city and, were living in a 2-bedroom with a roommate who was also working from home. And to be able to find space to just be, it was impossible. And so, nobody, selected their living space with the assumption that it would also be their working space. And so even sometimes when you're with somebody else, you can feel very lonely because you're just trying to find the quiet spot to take the call and trying to like come over here so you're not in anyone's way. And it's tough. I think the shift was an abrupt one, and the dynamics of who you live with and how your living space is set up, all the things you're describing play a big role. And having empathy for those, for those who are in a different setup than you are, I think is important too.
Totally. And then when we think about that too, like we used to go to work to make friends. Like I have some best friends that I've met at work. Actually, one of my best friends right now is someone I used to manage. Like you used to meet your friends at work. You used to like have that aspect of connection where you had to leave and go somewhere and talk to people. And that was just very different. And I was thinking a lot about that as I was preparing for this episode. I want to know from you, like, how do you define that genuine connection in the workplace? And why is it so crucial? I think I know why it's so crucial, but I'm so curious to hear why you think it's so crucial for things like team dynamics and productivity.
Yeah, for sure. So, marketing and advertising is a people business. That is literally our product. That is what we sell. We don't make anything tangible that you go and pick up off a shelf at a store and take home with you. We sell the ideas, the passions, the lived experience, the dreams, the hopes, the wishes, the visions of human beings that craft these stories that resonate with you and make you feel a certain type of way. And so for us, the question of, why is people connection critical to productivity is the answer is so clear because our product is our people. And so if we're not doing everything we possibly can to support our people, we are delivering a subpar product ultimately. That may not be true for every industry. If you're a long haul trucker or you're a stenographer, you don't necessarily need to have, as close of a connection with your colleagues as you do if you are, say, a brand strategist or a creative, where you have to be really vulnerable about, sharing ideas and, putting something out there with confidence and the hope that your colleagues can receive it and understand the beauty of what you're trying to sort of make real. And so in a people business, it is the most important thing that we invest in connection among our people. The way that we do that is by really thinking about the human experience. And again, in our business, we're no good if we don't understand the human experience. That's what we do. We tap into what's going on in people's worlds in order to build work that resonates deeply because we understand how people are living. So we have to walk that talk ourselves. Like, how do we look at our people and go, here's the experience you're having, here's how we could make it better, or here's the experience you're having. I don't know if we can make it better right now, but we can at least have some compassion and understanding that that's what you're up against, or that's what's happening in your world, and allow you to show up to work in whatever capacity is still productive and healthy for you at that time. So there's all these different ways that we do it, but I really think that if you work in a people business, and really every business is to an extent, but some businesses,
I was going to say,
that is the whole product. You're in one too. If you're a creator, if you are a thought leader, if you are a writer, like your life experience is what you are selling because you are bringing ideas, you're bringing a point of view, all of that forward. And so you really have to think about, as a leader, as a manager, as a culture champion, as an HR professional, wherever you sit, how you, invest in your people, thinking of them as truly the product in some ways, that your company is selling.
I used to joke that like my career goal was to be a product manager. Like early in my career, I like worked at a startup. I was like on a technical path. I like really wanted to build product. And I had this like inflection point in my career where they're like, hey, do you want to go work on this project? But it like will end up in HR. And I was like, sure. And then I never left HR. And I joke all the time, but it's true that like people are my product. And so like, even if your company isn't selling something that's like people related, these people there are still HR's product. And you should still think about how do they feel when they show up to work. And we've all seen the stats of like, if they're not connected, to each other, to the business, to the leaders, to the mission, they're probably not going to do their best work. And that's like
Yeah.
worth exploring. How do you actually build that genuine connection in a way that's just like not tacky? And I feel like y'all had it aligned so well from the jump because your business is people as well. And so I just want all HR people listening to like really think like your people are also your product, and how connected they are to the experience each other, like everyone's having, is also really important. So I love that.
So-
like it's crucial for team dynamics. You're right. Like you have to understand each other's lived experience. In a lot of ways, like makes you better as a person and a better product. But I feel like when we were in the pandemic, people were like, connection, we're going to do our Zoom happy hour. If I had to be on one more Zoom happy hour in 2020, I was miserable. I was like, I don't want to look at you through a computer screen anymore. It's really starting to like drag me down. So when we're thinking about fostering connection, what are some common pitfalls to avoid?
So I think the first thing, and this is going to sound like it could sound like a buzzword, but inclusion needs to be at the forefront of everything. There is no connection if you can't, really broaden the tent as widely as possible to let everybody in. And I think that is something that, as a leader is so important to demonstrate, as a core value, because, if I've had leaders in the past, and this was long before, inclusion was really, a topic that we dug into a whole lot, but there were leaders who were incredibly inclusive that went out of their way to bring people in from other parts of the organization, or, folks who may not have as large of a team, and just making sure they were part of a community if something great was happening. I've also had leaders who kept a very exclusive circle, and that's a really tough thing. So I would just say the first thing is try and be as inclusive as possible. The second thing, and this is advice that I give often when it comes to genuine connection, be inefficient with your time. I think a lot of times, especially remotely, we do these group, like you said, like a Zoom happy hour, a group, a group get together. And it can be a very efficient, like clean hour block on your calendar, and you check the box of team building and you saw everybody socially, and like, that's great. But the reality is the best connections are the ones where you're not looking at how long you have left in a meeting while you're trying to talk to somebody. So really thinking about how you can be inefficient with your time to build really thoughtful, deep, strong connections. The other thing I would say too is, even if you're a remote company, and pandemic aside, like people weren't getting together because they were worried about contracting, a virus that we knew very little about, that was very scary. That hopefully, knock on wood, that factor has passed for a little bit. But we're still in this place where you have a remote team, you have, some folks who might live in an area where they can get together in person. There's pros and cons to both. When I think about, and I know that many of your listeners are HR professionals, so they are often in a job where they are giving the best news or the worst news. And they have to build trust in order to, get the information and deliver, news either way, like effectively. So when you think about, again, coming into people's spaces in their homes, if they work remotely, if you are terminating someone, for instance, and I should preface, I don't work in HR, so I am.
Yeah, we haven't told that story.
Yeah, we got to tell that story. So I don't work in HR. I cannot relate to, that specific job task, other than to say, as a manager, I've unfortunately had to be part of it, and but you're doing that in someone's home, so they're getting this information while sitting in their home. On one hand, it's like, the bad juju, the negative juju, like permeates through the screen and is in their home. On the other, when it's over, they close their laptop and they can, go sit in their happy spot and be quiet and do what they need to do without everyone looking at them. The flip is, if you're doing something in person, you have the opportunity to read people. I mean, at the end of the day, we are animals. We can read energy. We can sense when there's danger. We can sense when, there's angst, and when there's, anxiety, even tension building. I mean, that's reading the room is so hard to do remotely. So I just think being thoughtful about the realities and the dynamics of what happens when you can be together and what happens when you are coming into someone's space remotely, and just having a little bit of a filter for what makes the most sense, assuming you're able to do certain things in person, some things remotely. Like maybe you don't have a choice, but if you don't have a choice, using that as a filter to say, here's where people are when they're receiving this interaction with me, whether it's a trust building thing, whether it's a social thing, whether it's, good news or bad news. Like you really have to think about the context of where they are in order to be able to be, effective in building a like an authentic connection, in that environment.
I love that. Those are excellent pitfalls to avoid. Like the inclusion piece is so important because I think a lot of times we forget that after work is like a great time for happy hour. However, there are parents who have kids they have to get.
That's right.
And it's like after work is not actually an inclusive time. So something we've tried at Work Week, which I've loved and I've just gotten to champion because I get to champion these things, is like every month we do like we call it a happy hour, but we change the name. So like one month of the quarter, it's after work. 1 month of the quarter, it's like around lunchtime, and we call it like a midday break. And then the last month of the quarter, it's like around a coffee time, like around like a 10 a.m. ish, although we have like people in different time zones. And the reason we did that, I wanted to take like an hour out of the workday because my CEO was like, are you sure you want to do this in the middle of the workday? And I was like, everybody does work differently. And from an inclusion perspective, if you make everything after work, what about the people who have to prioritize their physical health? So the gym is what they do after work, or people who have to go pick up their kids, or people who are caregivers and have to go relieve a nurse or go help a sibling take care of a parent. Like there's a lot of things that happen after work, and that's like not the best time. So I love when thinking about fostering connection is like really letting go of the habit that we have built of connection and looking to find new and unique ways to actually build connection.
That's right. That's a great example of being inefficient with time. You could easily copy paste, okay, we're doing our monthly happy hour, but to take the time to plan different slots, to take the time to think of different programming, to take the time to communicate and understand, like, to even understand who needs what. I know that Austen can't join this thing because she has to go pick up her kids from daycare. I know Hebba can't join at this time because, she takes a yoga class at that point. So I think that's a really good example of how inefficiency, and I just use that as a provocative framing, but like, it's really just thoughtfulness. Like, how do you be thoughtful about inclusion and not trying to template? You can't templatize connection.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good line. You can't templatize connection. The other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking about connection, and then we can move on, my last thought, is like everybody always assumes connection happens instantly. They're like, oh, we just like, they join one happy hour and suddenly they've built connection. And I love when you say be inefficient with your time, because you're right. So many people are like, my time is money and I have 8 hours in a day and I have all these projects I need to do. And like, why is my teammate not doing this well? And I keep thinking to myself, if you had just spent like an hour, 2 hours with them, really building their connection to you and their connection to the organization, you actually get a better return on your investment than if you just half-assed the relationship and then wondered why in a year they were leaving and saying they didn't really like working here.
Yes. I mean, that's like the equivalent of the dreaded pizza party, right? There's a slice of tepid cheese pizza, like it's not real. I mean, it's a thing that you did in a box you can check, but it's not real. It doesn't go as far for the recipient as you imagine it might as the giver. So I agree with you, really being thoughtful about the use of time.
Exactly. On the note of pizza parties, which are forced and somewhat awkward, do you have any practical strategies that you can share or even activities that you've done that actually promote connection without that feeling of like, ugh, I have to do this and it's awkward?
Yeah. So I guess this is probably a good moment to explain where I sit in my organization.
It's a mystery. It's been a mystery up until this part.
It's a mystery for many, and myself included some days, I'll be honest. So I came up in our business in client leadership, business leadership. So I was sort of the liaison between our company and all of the, creative work that we do, media work that we do, and our clients who are hiring us to develop campaigns and marketing programs for their brands. The doing of that job requires pulling together all kinds of people and all kinds of personalities and all kinds of agendas and all kinds of, energy levels and quirks and expectations and all the things. So I've been well primed for, a job that is about bringing people together for successful outcomes. What I have not been trained in formally, I'm not an HR professional. So I have not gone through, the true HR, what's the word? Like I've not been in the trenches
Trauma?
with HR. Trauma. There you go. I was going to let you say it.
No, I mean, like, listen, not everybody who comes on the I Hate It Here podcast is even an HR professional. I think your role is like brilliantly unique. And I think a lot of people could learn from that structure of like being someone who grew up in the company, and grew up was like a bad word, but like who went through a lot in the company, who is actually better positioned potentially than the HR leader to work on culture things.
Yes. And that's right. Like that's the point. So my chief people officer, who is the most amazing partner and just human being on the planet, Mike Grindell, and our talent director, Nikki Toussaint, who is also, Saint is in her name, and as it should be, because she's amazing. They are two of my closest partners. They are the ones that really do the HR work. But to your point, because I understand the doing of our business, it gives me a very different lens in terms of what to bring forward as an idea for how people should connect, how people should communicate.
Yeah.
What is a practical solution in the doing of our job? There's a lot of things that sound great, but if you haven't done the job, you wouldn't know that it's just not, it's not realistic. Like it's not realistic to do certain programs where, if you need client billable time or whatever, like there's just all these factors that unless you've been close to it, it's just hard to understand. So, thankfully I've had a leadership team that's rallied behind me in this role because it is a little bit unique and untraditional. But it's been a huge value add because I have come up through the business. And so all of that preface to say, what are some activities that we do without it feeling awkward or forced? One step is like, how do you find an informant or appoint a leader, either way, that knows what would feel awkward or forced because they have been in the doing of the work? That's the first thing. And sometimes HR is that close. Sometimes they're not. It depends on the organization, the size, the job, the industry, all sorts of things. But if you don't have somebody who is in the work, that is the first thing I would suggest, is find somebody who can really inform what would be authentic, what would be awkward, what would be helpful, what would be clunky. The second thing is communication and connection go hand in hand. And so when we first started doing this whole deep dive around culture, like I sat down with my executive leadership team and we did an audit of every single thing that we were doing, whether it was quote unquote culture or not. Everything from how we do our timesheets to how we share thought leadership to the tools we use, to the meetings we have, to the pizza party, even the pizza parties, and it was like 300 cells long in an Excel spreadsheet. It was this massive thing, but it let us really do an audit of here's everything. Like what is actually serving the purpose of the things that we say we care about as far as the work that we do, our role in the universe, our higher purpose, our higher calling, and the values that we espouse as a corporation and as a company that we want other people to align to, because ultimately that's the stickiness. And so we did all this work and we came to 6 categories that are what sort of organize our culture. I wouldn't say they define it, but they help us organize and prioritize and fund and, invest and divest of, all the time and money and, things that have to go behind this. So the 6 categories are: 1, connection, in-person and remote. Even though we're a fully remote company, we understand that in-person connection is critical. So what are the things that we can do in person? 2, communication, and that's how we share, how leaders share out to the organization, and how we listen. we've got to be really intentional about listening back so that we can have the information we need to make better decisions. The third is creativity. Again, we're a creative company. So how do we inspire it and how do we build it? Like, what tools are we giving our people to get excited about their work? And what tools are we giving people to do their best work?
Yeah.
The fourth is process, which is, tools, all the software, all the, Slack and all the things, and the ways of working. How do we come together? Do we do quarterly business reviews? What are the markers of our process? The fifth is recognition. So how do we as a company recognize our people for jobs well done? And how do we enable them to recognize each other peer to peer? And then the fifth is, kind of a broader bucket, but it's like programs. So it's all of our people training, skill development. It's all of our benefits. We have, work from home stipends and wellness stipends and pet adoption stipends and all these things that are, financial boons to things that we care about. So when you look at those 6 categories, you have a really robust sense of all the things you need to be doing to create connection. And sometimes connection comes through, being a leader, being really vulnerable in how they share out to the organization. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it comes through in people having a tool to recognize each other for a job well done and give them a shout out and get, some public praise. Sometimes it comes through, we have a employee meetup program where we give folks money and say, if you want to meet up in person, go to a happy hour. We'll pay for it. Go do this. And we sort of let them, some people have gone to a museum. Some people did a axe throwing thing. Some people did a little dinner cruise. But they can decide what they want to do with it versus us saying, here's what you're going to do. So that was, it's a lot, but I think that, really being thoughtful about what connection looks like, not just we're getting together, but it's so much more pervasive than that. And it spans all of those categories because all of those things are what enable us to be really authentic when we interface in any sort of way, in person or remote, socially or professionally. All of that matters when it comes to building really deep, meaningful connections at work.
Yeah. I love that y'all did a culture audit. So many people don't do that. And I also love that you said everything was a piece of connection and culture. That it is recognition, it is the way you all talk to each other, it is the systems you use and all these things. Because I think that if somebody is really struggling with their employees don't feel connected and their culture is suffering, starting with a culture audit can go a very long way.
Yes.
And I love that you said you had 300 rows and then you categorize them oh, my little project manager brain is losing its mind. Because I would love that. That would be so nice.
Yeah, I think culture sometimes can feel very tactical. You're the person doing the gathering, or you're the person doing the volunteer event. And if sure, there are tactics, but just like anything, there's a much larger strategy behind it. And it's really about where are the places we want to spend our energy and what's going to give us the most return. And I mean us, the collective, our people, not us, the leaders, managers, but us, everybody. What is going to give us the most return in a people-oriented business where, and this has happened, we've done a volunteer event that we're this is just a nice thing to do. But if you're picking weeds in a public garden next to somebody that you've never worked with before and just chit-chatting, and then the next thing you know, you're getting pulled together for a pitch, suddenly you already have a relationship there and it's a little less daunting and a little less scary, and there's camaraderie and, and rapport that didn't exist before. So all of that stuff, everything can feel so tactical, but really, to your point, starting with an audit and building a strategy where the leaders understand what they're investing in and why, that makes everything else that falls out of it that much easier and more impactful.
Yeah, I loved the part that you said that find your, I don't know if you intended to say informant, but I loved that because I'm always who are my people? I have a running list of who are my people in the org that are instantly going to be honest with me about how something went. And I look to those people to get feedback, constructive and positive, on if we should do something. And so we have we have a good amount of Gen Z. Sometimes I'll ask them is this something that you would be interested in, or is this something you care about? Because it's interesting to know from them, what do they want to feel successful at work? And so I love that find your informant, because they're going to be the people that are going to tell you ew, we don't want to do that. That's awkward and not fun. And they're going to be the people that when you run something are going to be honest with you on how it made them feel.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And Gen Z, I mean, I know this is a hot topic, but what we're finding is that Gen Z appreciates so much of this, but I don't think that their expectation is that work is where, like you asked this question earlier, you know, you
They're going
used
to
to
meet
make all
their
of your
best
friendships at
friend or
work.
something.
I don't think their expectation is that work is where they go for everything the way that it might have been for millennials. Like for me, work was where I found my best friends. Work was where I made my money. Work was where I spent all of my time. Work was, you know, for instance, we have an employee assistance program. I think many companies do, where you can find a therapist or you can find, you know, legal support if that's what you need. Like I would imagine Gen Z's like, no, thanks. I don't want to get my therapist at work. Like I'll find my own. Thank you so much. Or, you know, hey, I'd like to know you and have a relationship with you, but I don't want to hang out with you every single second of my day and then still hang out with you when my day's over. Like I'm going to go do something. So it's a very interesting paradigm shift as well, just based on generational preferences.
Yeah, that's so true. Something I want to talk about because I'm fascinated by your organization and going fully remote when the pandemic hit, but still doing in-person things. How are you tailoring your strategies to accommodate both in-person meetups, like what you all are doing, and remote work effectively?
I mean, I will be honest, Hebba, that is the hardest part of my job. It's the hardest because it requires such insane intentionality. It requires a whole project stream of travel management. And with that comes like dietary restrictions and personal schedules and, you know, just all these things. And honestly, it takes the most money. It is the most cost ineffective of all the things we do. You know, so before the pandemic, we had two offices, one in Atlanta and one in Tampa, Florida. And now we have employees across 12 states, which is amazing. It's been great from a talent acquisition standpoint. We've been able to tap into talent in a much broader pool, which has been great for our business and our products. Products being the ideas of our people. But when you have people from, you know, even more diverse markets and backgrounds, the work just gets better. So that has been a huge advantage. But to get people from 12 states together at a mid-sized company on a regular basis is so tough. And I also think it's, you know, it almost requires a whole job, which some of it is my job. I mean, I'm not above anything. So sometimes I'm like making plane ticket adjustments because somebody's, you know, dog died and they need to come in a day later, whatever, like that stuff happens. But it's a combination of like the logistics of doing it and then the strategy of, okay, we're all here. Now what? Like, what do we do with this time? And how do we make sure that the reason for gathering feels meaningful and thoughtful, and, you know, the programming is relevant and all of that. So it's, that was a non-answer. The answer to your question, how do I do it? It's really hard. It's really hard. And I think that's where the most success we've had to do it at scale has been to create programs that we then hand over to people for them to take advantage of if they want to. And some people are really passionate and really want to. And some people are like, I want to if you do it for me, but like not bad enough for me to do it for myself. And you're like, okay, well, you know, you just sort of meet people where they are. But we've encouraged, you know, meetups in key markets where there's, you know, critical mass. We've put programs together, volunteer or thought leadership or whatever, where we can. We're going to try and do at least one time a year where we get everyone together, because it really does make you feel like you're part of something in a way that just is not replicatable through a screen. But again, that costs money. Yeah. That costs money. We just have to be wise about how we invest that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. We just did our first company-wide in-person retreat in 2-ish years. We got everyone together. It was a lot. And I had a budget. We managed to it. We did great. But it still was like, there are some companies that do this like 4 times a year. I'm like, well, you must have a whole line item in your budget just devoted to in-person meetups. But I think what I have said a lot is like hybrid is honestly the worst of both worlds. It's the worst of in-person and the worst of remote is hybrid.
I agree.
So it's tough. So like I think a lot
Well,
of
and
people are struggling.
now we're in a position where we had folks who started obviously well pre-pandemic that had no desire to be remote employees, but they love the company and they've stayed and they're handling it and it's fine. We have other folks who have joined the company, during the pandemic and have stayed because we're a remote company.
Yeah.
And we haven't done any forced RTO, so return to office. So I know, right? That is, if there was an emoji for that, this is it. Like,
It's this. We're not doing it.
But that's a great example of manufacture. Like it's a manufactured plan that sounds good, but practically, like it is not for the people. People need flexibility. Can still include having an office that people go to, but like not forcing a badge swipe and calling it connection. Like that ain't it.
Yeah.
But we are in this weird spot where we have folks who have stayed with the company because they love the company, but remote work is not necessarily their preference. We have now probably far more employees that have joined the company as a remote company and they're staying because they want to work for a remote company because the flexibility to manage your life is just unparalleled when that's a choice that you're empowered to make. So, and I'm one of those. I mean, I'm actually both of those people. I love this company. I'd stay probably even if they forced me to, back to the office, but I also could not have been more grateful for the ability to work from home while I went through IVF twice and had two, pregnancies and two children, like to juggle it all. I mean, this has been such a tremendous value add as a working parent. So I'm very grateful for that.
It's the worst, but it's the best. And so I think like you just got to figure out, I think the thing about when you're thinking about like connection and strategies, a lot of HR work feels like top down, like you like push it out or you're like, we're all going to do this thing together. And then we're all going to meet up and do this. And I just think when you force people to do anything, it just feels disingenuous. And so I think
That's so true.
Y'all giving budget for people to meet up in person in their markets and do what they want to do is genius. Because then it's self-serve. Because then you're saying like, we want you all to be connected. We care enough about it to give you a budget to do it, but we're going to leave it up to you because you are adults who have agency in what you want. And I think that is so powerful for a connection and just like for people respecting what you're trying to do versus saying, hey, everyone, we're going to get together and we're going to go to this baseball game. I remember one time, I will never forget this. It's so far in my brain. We had a CHRO who was a man and he wanted all of us to go to a baseball game together. And the entire HR department was literally all women. I think we had like one other man. And all the women were like, we don't want to go to a baseball game. It's hot. It's in the summer. And none of us even like baseball. But this person loved it. So he was like, we're all going to go to baseball. And everyone went to the event, but we all were like, oh, why are we here? And I just thought that sticks in my brain all the time when I plan anything at work week. Because I'm like, my worst, it actually does harm to plan something that people don't want. And so I think like the part of connection is like give people the effing agency to build their own connections. Give them the budget, give them the support, but say, hey, this is up to y'all to do how you see fit.
That is so true, Hebba. Like the idea that the hoops that you have to jump through to as a parent to take an evening to do all that, to go to a thing that you don't want to go to, you just like,
want to go to.
And you're right. It shows it reinforces the lack of awareness and like the tone deafness of your leaders. Like if your leaders can't listen enough to understand that is not an activity that the majority of the team is interested in spending their time doing, like why do it? You're right. Like it works against you.
I was like, who picked this event? And they were like, him.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, none of us want to go. Did any of you think to say like, none of us want to go to baseball? None of us like baseball? And they all were like, no, it was his choice. And I was like, ugh. But that is a beautiful segue because I do want to talk about leadership as part of connection because we talk a lot about like what we can do as HR leaders and other people in the business, but I think your leaders play such a huge role. So let's talk about like, what responsibilities do you think leaders have in actually cultivating a culture that values authentic connection among the employees?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is if you're a leader, you are probably accountable in some way for the bottom line. And I think leaders first and foremost need to understand that culture is not an overnight fix. What's the saying? Like today's seeds are not going to be tomorrow's fruit. Like it takes it takes a minute for the impact of culture to really be the business multiplier that it is. But if you stay the course, if you continue to believe, if you read the research and read this, I mean, there's so much out there that underscores how thriving cultures create thriving businesses. If you believe that to be true, and you stay the course with your investment, and you have a strategy that you believe in, understanding that a pizza party is never going to work, but even
I have a gluten allergy. It's definitely not going to work for me.
No. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes. We've got like gluten, dairy free, like exactly. It's like inclusive. Know your people. But yeah, that stuff like that is never that's not a solution. A bar cart, a ping pong table, whatever the things are that, like that's not culture. What culture is looking across the 6 categories I mentioned: communication, connection, creativity, process, recognition, and programs. If you look at what you're doing across all of those things and you believe in it and you are willing to stay the course long term as a leader and as somebody who's accountable for the business, having that belief and beating that drum that's the first and most important thing. The second thing that I would say is a little more tactical, which is when you're talking about leaders and building connection, it can be awkward. It can feel forced. If you're a leader, set the tone. Like, be the one to be awkward first. If you think about, there's somebody new that joined the team and you're like, I don't really know them, or somebody that, maybe has been around a long time that you've seen a million times and you're like, I should know them, but I don't. If you're the more senior person, you be the one to reach out and say, hey, we've seen each other in the virtual hallways a million times. We may have even met a couple times. Like, I want to get to know you better. Sorry if this is awkward, but it was important to me to build a relationship with you. Would you be interested in coffee or virtual coffee or whatever that looks like? That is always like the feeling of awkwardness runs both ways, but it's even amplified if you're trying to be awkward up the chain, right? Like, What does this person think of me? Or like, how presumptuous that I'm asking for their time. So I think if you're a leader, be the one to like cross the barrier first and be the one to reach out first, because that is going to set the tone for everyone else. And then I think the third thing is, and we talked about this at the beginning, you said clear as kind. I could not agree more. Be clear about your expectations as a leader, as they relate to the work that you're doing, the culture that you're building, the team that you're cultivating. Be really, really clear about what you want and what you will not accept or tolerate. And that, again, everyone wants to know the boundaries. And if they don't have boundaries, it gets really hairy. But if you have, a leader who is really vocal about what great looks like and what not great looks like, that is by far and away, where I see the most effective teams run, is because they have somebody who's giving them sort of that context and those boundaries. So those are my 3 things. I think, and understand the long-term investment, be the first one to make the move, and be clear.
Yeah. Clear as kind, I think, is a Brene Brown quote. I'm pretty sure. I'm not like the biggest Brene Brown stan. I don't know. I think I read it once and I was like, oh, I like that. I'm going to use that. Sprinkle it in everywhere. Clear as kind. So thank you, Brene Brown, for that.
Yes.
It's so interesting you bring this up, because I think like Gen Z especially can sniff the bullshit a mile away.
Oh God, yes.
So if you are being inauthentic and you're like, I'm going to be surface level and build this connection with everybody and I care so much, and then you do everything to show that you don't actually care, you're not actually listening to them. You're not spending time taking the initiative. They're going to see it so fast and they're going to sniff it and clock it and say, absolutely not. That person's a fraud. And so I think like as a leader, like working with your leadership team as HR, as working with your leadership team to help them understand how important connection is, and how as a leaders, there's a power dynamic. Exactly what you said, Austen. Like the most junior person is not going to slack the most senior person and say, hey, can we get coffee? There's a there's a distinct power dynamic there at play in the workplace, as much as we all hate hierarchy and stuff like that exists. And so I think like working with your leaders to help them understand, like if they take the initiative and show employees that they are there, they're accessible, they're around, they can build connection with them, they want to get to know them, it can go such a long way. You don't have to build a program, do a million things. A simple, hey, we're happy to have you here, would love to spend 15 to 30 minutes getting to know you goes such a long way.
Such a long way. And those are pennies in the bank of trust. They're pennies in the bank. If things like Great Place to Work or Best Places to Work certification is something that your organization is interested in, there is no better way to, and I'm not saying, reach out with the intention of trying to like get a certification, but if that's something that you want to do, building relationships like that, again, be inefficient with your time. Find the opportunities for one-on-ones, reach out and, create the authentic connections. That is going to take you farther than any amount of other activities will take you, because what you want to know is that the people that you're conducting your business with, the people you're spending the vast majority of your waking life together with, are quality people that care about you and want to know you and want to accept you. And I mean, that's invaluable. That's priceless.
Okay, honestly, I think that's a really good place to end this episode, because that is just such good advice. I feel like we just gave a lot of really good advice for people who are working with leaders. I think maybe the last question we can leave listeners with is like, how we've talked about like how the important role that leaders play, but like how can leaders actually model that behavior to encourage openness, trust, and collaboration within their teams?
The best leaders I see are the ones that run into the fire first. And so if there's something that is wrong, they're the first one to be there, to address it, to be present, to acknowledge it, to not ignore it. And when there's a beautiful, wonderful, awesome thing happening, they're the last ones to take the mic and talk about it. They position other people to be able to share and to be able to own those positive moments. So they're the ones that are the first people there in the times of crisis, and they're the last ones to speak when it's a time of joy. Not to say that they're not present, but I just think platforming other people is another key mark of a great leader.
I love that last line, like run into the fire first. It's so meaningful and impactful and just great advice. Like if your leaders aren't behaving like that, people are just going to notice it. Just like I said, they're going to clock it. And I think leaders play such a big role in connection and that reminder that they don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. There's a way to give that stage to somebody else and to elevate them goes such a long way. That's that's a beautiful place to end this episode. So for listeners who want to get in touch with you, Austen, how can they find you? Obviously, I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, but any other ways they can reach out if they're interested in getting to know you more?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn, Austen Tully. You can email me, Austen, austen.tully@guidedbygood.com. And I'm happy to chat and share more. And, I love the community you've built, Hebba. This is such a safe, wonderful, honest, brave space. You're an incredible leader. Thank you for educating us, inspiring us, and just giving us food for thought. I love starting my day with, listening to you and your guests talk. So thank you again for having me.
Austen, you're the best. Thank you for joining me today. This was so fun. I can't wait for, I think, some future collabs that are coming up with you and me. We'll be on a round table together. I think that's already happened by the time this episode will have aired, but I'll include in the show notes anyway so people can watch it. But thank you so much for joining me today. I'm honored you spent time with us, teaching us a little bit about how you were able to build a really interesting culture in the unique role that you play. And I hope more HR people and organizations consider putting employees like you in these positions, because I think it can make a huge difference on the culture and the impact you can have. So thank you again, Austen.